The massive doors of the Galactic Council chamber hissed open, revealing a sight that made several alien delegates recoil in their seats. Two humans walked through the entrance with steady, confident steps that echoed across the polished crystal floor. The sound seemed unnaturally loud in a place where most species glided, floated, or scuttled silently. Ambassador Jinwoo Kim wore a simple black suit that looked primitive compared to the shimmering energy fields and bioluminescent robes surrounding him. Beside him, Admiral Hyejin Park's military uniform displayed colorful ribbons and metal insignia that sparkled under the chamber's ethereal lighting. Her boots clicked against the floor with each step, a rhythmic sound that seemed to announce humanity's arrival like a war drum. The assembled delegates watched with a mixture of curiosity and dread. The ethereal collective's representatives floated in their translucent energy bubbles, their gaseous forms shifting nervously. The insectoid harmony workers clicked their mandibles in what their species considered polite greeting, though their compound eyes tracked every movement the humans made. From the shadowy corners, the void touched observed through sensors that glowed like dying stars. "Honorable Council," Kim began, his voice cutting through the chamber's usual whispers and electronic translations. Unlike other species who communicated through harmonic frequencies or chemical signals, humans used crude sound waves that seemed almost violent in their directness. "I bring greetings from Earth and all human colonies." Several delegates shifted, uncomfortably. The way humans spoke reminded them of predators claiming territory. Elder Quicks of the Harmony Worlds extended a tentacle-like appendage in what passed for a welcoming gesture among his people. His voice came through the translation matrix as gentle chimes. "Welcome, representatives of the young species. We trust you bring news of cultural exchange and peaceful cooperation." Kim's expression didn't change, but something in his stance made Admiral Park take a small step forward. The movement was subtle, but every alien in the chamber recognized it. It was the posture of a warrior preparing for conflict. "The Republic of Earth formally declares war on the Zephyrian Empire," Kim announced. The words hit the chamber like a shockwave. Several of the floating ethereals immediately darkened, their energy fields flickering with distress. The harmony workers' clicking ceased entirely, creating an unnatural silence. Even the bioluminescent panels on the walls seemed to dim in response to the collective shock. For nearly 30 seconds, no one spoke. No one moved. The only sound was the gentle hum of the chamber's life support systems and the distant rumble of starships docking at the station's outer rings. Then the whispers began. "Did they just—" The crystalline collective's representative's voice cracked like breaking glass. "Impossible," breathed a delegate from the Peaceful Union, their translator struggling with the concept of voluntary warfare. "Barbarism," hissed Council member Velthara of the Peaceful Collective, her serpentine form coiling with agitation. The bioluminescent patterns on her scaled skin flashed angry reds and oranges. "Pure, primitive barbarism." Admiral Park finally spoke, her voice steady as ship-grade durasteel. "Council members seem surprised by our decision. Perhaps you've forgotten that 3 entire star systems are currently under Zephyrian occupation." "The Kepler colonies," added Kim. 17 billion sentient beings. The Zephyrians aren't just occupying their worlds, they're harvesting them." Elder Quix's tentacles writhed in what his species displayed as extreme distress. "Ambassador Kim, surely you understand that war is the ultimate failure of civilization. Every advanced species in this galaxy has moved beyond such crude solutions. The mediation protocols exist for exactly these situations." "We tried mediation," Park replied, her hand resting casually on what looked like a simple metal device at her belt. Several alien delegates recognized it as a human weapon and shifted nervously. "For 18 months we sent diplomats. The Zephyrians responded by conquering another system." "But violence never solves anything," pleaded Representative Morvac of the Tranquil Worlds, his 4 eyes blinking rapidly in distress. "Our species learned this truth millennia ago. War only breeds more war. Surely negotiation, economic pressure, cultural exchange—" "The Zephyrians don't negotiate," Kim interrupted, his voice carrying an edge that made several delegates flinch. "They consume. They've turned 3 star systems into factory farms for sentient labor. Children are being bred specifically for slavery. Entire civilizations are being processed like raw materials. The chamber erupted in horrified gasps and clicks, but not at the Zephyrian atrocities. The aliens were more disturbed by humanity's casual acceptance of warfare as a solution. Council leader Thys, a being of pure energy contained within a geometric crystal structure, pulsed with confused colors. Even if what you say is true, surely the civilized response is to increase diplomatic pressure, perhaps trade sanctions, cultural isolation protocols. Admiral Park's laugh was short and humorless. While you debate sanctions, 17 billion beings suffer in chains. The Council voted within minutes. It was unanimous. They would deploy observation fleets to monitor the coming conflict, not to help, but to document what they were certain would be humanity's swift and decisive defeat. The footage would serve as a warning to other young species about the futility of choosing violence over enlightened diplomacy. As the session concluded, none of the assembled delegates understood what they had just set in motion. They saw only primitive newcomers choosing barbarism over civilization. They had no concept of what humans called righteous fury, or the terrifying efficiency that emerged when humanity decided something was worth fighting for. The observation fleets began deploying immediately, their crews expecting to document a brief tragic lesson in the consequences of abandoning peaceful principles. They were about to witness something far more disturbing than military defeat. The observation pod drifted silently through space, its alien crew watching the human fleet. Through advanced sensors, Commander Ixthan of the Void-touched species adjusted his viewing apparatus, his 6 eyes focusing on the massive battleship floating before them. The UES Incheon stretched nearly 2 kilometers from bow to stern, bristling with weapons that looked crude but somehow menacing. "Fascinating," whispered tactical analyst Morpheus, her crystalline form pulsing with confused colors. "Their ship design follows no logical pattern. Those weapon placements should create terrible blind spots, yet something about them feels intentional." Inside the Incheon's mess hall, Captain Min-jae Choi sat at a metal table that had seen better days. The furniture was practical, built for function rather than comfort. Around him, nearly 300 crew members filled the space with sounds that made the alien observers recoil in their pods. They were laughing. Sergeant Yoonji Lee stood on a chair, gesturing wildly as she told a story about her grandmother's pet chicken that once chased a delivery drone for 6 blocks. Her audience roared with appreciation, some wiping tears from their eyes. The sound echoed off the metal walls like thunder, raw and unfiltered in a way that alien ears found almost painful. "Commander," reported scanner operative Zilth, his tentacles twitching nervously. "I'm detecting elevated heart rates and increased respiration among the humans, but their stress hormone levels are declining." Ixthen's primary eyes swiveled toward the scanner readouts. "That's impossible. They're about to face the most powerful military force in this sector of the galaxy. They should be paralyzed with fear." On the screens, Private Do-hyun Nam was arm wrestling with Corporal Kyung-min Seo, while a crowd cheered them on. The winner bought the loser a drink from the ship's synthesizer, and both men embraced like old friends afterward. Nearby, Lieutenant So-young Park was teaching a group of younger soldiers how to fold paper into complex shapes, an ancient human art form they called origami. "Look at this." Morpheus directed her colleagues' attention to another section of the mess hall. Lieutenant Jae-hyun Kim sat alone at a corner table, writing on actual paper with an archaic tool called a pen. His face was serious, concentrated, as he carefully formed each letter by hand. The alien observers leaned closer, their translation matrices working overtime to decode the message. It was a letter to his sister, talking about everyday things. The weather on his home colony. A funny joke he'd heard. A promise to visit when he returned, along with hopes that she was doing well in her studies. "He's writing as if he expects to see her again," Ixthen observed. "Yet our intelligence reports give their fleet a 12% survival probability at best." Around Kim, dozens of other soldiers were doing the same thing. Some wrote letters, others recorded video messages on personal devices. A few simply sat quietly, looking at photographs of family members. The alien watchers were disturbed by how calmly the humans faced their probable deaths. Perhaps their primitive brains cannot process statistical probability, suggested junior analyst Vex, his insectoid mandibles clicking thoughtfully. They might literally be incapable of understanding that they're about to be destroyed. The observation shifted to the ship's training deck, where Sergeant Sunmi Park was leading her squad through combat exercises. The space was huge, designed to simulate different battlefield conditions with holographic projectors and movable obstacles. But what the humans were doing there defied every alien understanding of military preparation. They were playing. Park's unit moved through a simulated urban environment, but instead of grim efficiency, they showed something that looked almost like joy. When Private Chanwoo Kim stumbled during a tactical advance, his squadmates helped him up while laughing. When someone missed a target during shooting practice, others offered tips and encouragement rather than punishment. Watch this. Morpheus highlighted a section where two soldiers were sharing ammunition. In most species militaries, resources were strictly controlled and hoarded, but these humans passed their supplies around freely, making sure everyone had what they needed. The training exercise itself was brutal. The holographic enemies moved with deadly precision. The simulated weapons created real physical stress, and the scenarios were designed to push the soldiers to their absolute limits. Yet somehow the humans made it look like a competitive game. "Contact left," shouted Corporal Min-hyuk Lee, diving behind cover as holographic energy blasts lit up the training deck. His movements were fluid, practiced, deadly efficient. "Got him," replied Private Ji-won Yoon, her simulated rifle taking down the target with a perfect headshot. She grinned and gave Lee a thumbs-up signal. The alien observers watched in growing horror as the humans cycled through scenario after scenario. Urban warfare, ship-to-ship boarding actions, defensive positions. Each exercise was more challenging than the last, yet the soldiers' energy never flagged. "They're enjoying this," X then whispered, his voice filled with revulsion. "They find pleasure in simulated violence." But then they noticed something else. When a soldier got killed in the simulation, their teammates would risk everything to recover the body. When someone was wounded, others would abandon tactical advantages to provide aid. The humans fought with terrible efficiency, but they never left anyone behind. "Sir," reported Scanner Zilth, "I'm reading some kind of energy field around the human groups. It's not technological. It seems to be emotional." The readings were unlike anything in their databases. Where most species showed individual fear, signatures before battle, the humans generated something collective, a shared confidence that seemed to strengthen as they trained together. In the ship's armory, weapons specialist Seung-hwan Park was customizing his rifle with personal modifications. He'd painted small symbols on the stock, names of family members, coordinates of his home world, a simple drawing of Earth's moon. Other soldiers were doing similar things, turning their standard-issue equipment into personal talismans. "They're forming bonds," Morpheus realized with dawning horror. "Not just tactical partnerships, emotional connections that make them stronger as a unit." The observation crew watched Master Sergeant Jae-min Ko lead a group meditation session. The humans sat in perfect silence for 30 minutes, breathing in synchronization, their minds apparently linked in some invisible way. When it ended, they moved through their duties with even greater coordination. "Commander," Zilth's voice was shaking, "I don't think they're in denial about the odds." Xthen's 6 eyes focused on the scanner readings. The humans' vital signs showed complete awareness of their situation. They understood exactly what they were facing: the mathematical probability of death, the overwhelming enemy superiority, the near certainty that many of them would not return home, and they were still laughing. "Send an immediate report to the Council," Xthen ordered, his voice filled with dread. "Recommend that all observation vessels maintain maximum distance from the human fleet. I'm beginning to suspect that this species might be collectively insane." The report that reached the Galactic Council later that day contained a single, terrifying conclusion. Humanity wasn't preparing for war like any known species. They were preparing for war like something entirely new, something that treated death as just another challenge to overcome together. The Kepler station hung in space like a massive metal flower, its docking arms extending toward the nearby asteroid mining fields. Commander Jisoo Nam's patrol of 5 human frigates moved through the outer perimeter, their hulls gleaming under the distant star's light. The ships looked small compared to the massive station, but their weapon arrays tracked constantly, searching. 4 threats. Contacts on long-range sensors, reported Lieutenant Yuna Shin from the bridge of the UES Daegu. 12 Zephyrian vessels, hunter-killer configuration approaching from the asteroid belt. Nam's voice came through the comm system, calm and steady. All ships, battle stations. Remember, we're not here to win. We're here to make them pay for every meter of space. The alien observation pods, hidden among the asteroids, focused their sensors on the approaching battle. Commander X then of the Void. Touched watched with fascination as the Zephyrian fleet emerged from behind a massive rock formation. Their ships were sleek and predatory, built for speed and overwhelming firepower. Each vessel was twice the size of the human frigates, their hulls covered in energy shields that shimmered like oil on water. The mathematical advantage is clear, reported tactical analyst Morpheus. 12-5, superior technology, established tactical position. The humans should retreat immediately, but the humans didn't retreat. Instead, they did something that made the alien observers lean forward in their pods with confusion. The 5 frigates suddenly scattered in completely different directions, breaking formation in what appeared to be panic. "They're running," observed Scanner Zilth with satisfaction, finally showing some sense. The Zephyrian Admiral Chromax, commanding from his flagship Devourer, watched the humans flee with contempt. His species had conquered 17 star systems, using the same tactics: overwhelm the enemy, let them scatter in fear, then hunt them down one by one like frightened prey. "Pursuit formation," Chromax ordered, his voice carrying the authority of a predator. "Split into 3 groups, run them down before they can escape to hyperspace." The Zephyrian ships divided their fleet, each group chasing after the fleeing humans. Their engines blazed with energy as they accelerated, closing the distance rapidly. On their screens, the human ships appeared to be running in genuine panic, their movements erratic and desperate. But Commander X then noticed something strange. "Those aren't random flight patterns," he whispered to his crew. "Look at the trajectories. They're drawing the Zephyrians into specific positions." The trap sprung with devastating efficiency. The scattered human ships suddenly turned as one, their movements coordinated with mathematical precision. In seconds, they transformed from fleeing prey into attacking wolves, appearing where the Zephyrians least expected them. Captain Dongwoo Lee's frigate, the UES Gwangju, materialized from behind an asteroid directly above the Zephyrian flagship. His weapons opened fire at point-blank range, particle beams tearing through the enemy's shields like paper. The surprise was complete. "Impossible!" Chromax snarled as his ship shuddered under the assault. "They were running. Our sensors showed panic formations. The human ships moved like they were connected by invisible threads. When the Zephyrians tried to regroup, the humans were already repositioning. When the enemy attempted to use their superior numbers, the humans scattered again, only to reappear in perfect attack formation moments later." "They're not communicating," Morpheus observed with growing alarm. "No radio signals, no quantum entanglement networks. How are they coordinating?" The answer came as the aliens watched Lieutenant Sujin Park's frigate execute a maneuver that should have been impossible. She dove directly into the Zephyrian formation, her ship's engines screaming as she wove between enemy vessels. Her weapons fired in all directions, but every shot was perfectly timed to avoid hitting her own allies. "They're predicting each other's moves," X then realized with horror, "without technology. They're operating on pure instinct." The battle reached its climax when Captain Dongwoo Lee's ship took a direct hit from 3 Zephyrian heavy cruisers. The UES Gwangju's hull cracked like an egg, atmosphere bleeding out in crystalline clouds. Emergency lights flickered as the ship's systems failed one by one. "Ship down!" Lee's voice crackled over the comm, filled with static but somehow still calm. "Reactor critical. Life support failing. All hands, prepare for impact." The alien observers expected to see the human ship retreat or surrender. Instead, they watched in growing terror as Lee did something that defied every known law of warfare. He aimed his dying vessel directly at the Zephyrian flagship's engines and pushed his reactor to maximum output. "He's going to ram them," Zilth whispered, his voice filled with disbelief. "He's sacrificing his entire crew to damage one enemy ship." The collision was spectacular. The Guangzhou struck the Zephyrian flagship like a missile, its hull crumpling. On impact, the explosion lit up the entire battlefield, energy cascading through both ships' systems. But instead of destroying the enemy vessel, the impact crippled its engines and left it drifting helplessly. "Survivors in the water," came the voice of pilot Minji Yoon from her fighter craft. "I'm going in." The aliens watched in amazement as the small human fighter dove through the debris field, weaving between chunks of twisted metal and energy discharges. Yoon's craft was built for speed and maneuverability, but what she was attempting was suicide. The wreckage was filled with radiation and unstable energy fields that would kill any normal pilot. "She's insane," Morpheus observed. "There's no way to survive in that debris field." But Yoon had spotted something the aliens missed: a Zephyrian escape pod, floating among the wreckage, its occupants probably dead or unconscious. Instead of avoiding it, she maneuvered her fighter alongside and somehow forced the pod's docking hatch open. "Emergency evacuation in progress," Yoon reported, her voice strained but determined. "Got 4 survivors from the Guangzhou, using captured Zephyrian pod as life raft." The alien observers watched in growing horror as Yoon turned the enemy escape pod into a rescue vehicle. She somehow managed to load wounded humans into the cramped space, then used her fighter to tow the pod away from the battlefield. The entire operation took less than 10 minutes, but it defied every known principle of space combat. Admiral Chromax, watching from his crippled flagship, felt something he hadn't experienced in decades of warfare: genuine fear. His species had faced countless enemies, but they all followed predictable patterns. They retreated when outnumbered, surrendered when facing certain death, and prioritized their own survival above all else. "They're turning our own tactics against us," he reported to his fleet commanders, his voice filled with confusion. "Every retreat becomes their advantage. Every loss makes them more creative." The remaining Zephyrian ships found themselves facing an enemy that seemed to grow stronger with each casualty. When they destroyed a human vessel, the debris somehow became a weapon. When they damaged a human ship, the crew used the damage to their advantage. Every conventional tactic failed against opponents who treated warfare like a deadly puzzle to be solved with imagination and sacrifice. "Sir," reported his tactical officer, "the humans are regrouping. They're preparing for another attack." Chromax looked at his displays and realized something that filled him with dread. Despite losing 2 ships and suffering heavy casualties, the human fleet was still fighting. More than that, they were still coordinating, still moving with that impossible precision that defied every law of military science. "Withdraw," he ordered, his voice hollow with defeat. "Full retreat to the outer system." The alien observers watched in stunned silence as the Zephyrian fleet, superior in every measurable way, fled from a handful of human frigates. Commander X then began composing his report to the Galactic Council, but he struggled to find words for what he'd witnessed. The humans hadn't just won a battle. They'd turned warfare itself into something new, something that made victory and defeat meaningless concepts. They fought not to win, but to protect, not to destroy, but to save. And somehow, that made them more terrifying than any conventional military force. "Send immediate warning to all Council fleets," X then ordered. "Recommend maximum distance from human combat operations. We're not dealing with a conventional military force. We're dealing with something that treats death as just another tactical option." The colony ship Busan had been a marvel of human engineering. Stretching 5 kilometers from bow to stern, and carrying 30,000 civilians to their new home among the stars. Now it drifted in pieces through the Arcturus system, its hull torn open like a flower blooming in reverse. Atmosphere leaked out in glittering streams that caught the light of the nearby star, creating an almost beautiful display of destruction. Major Seokjin Park checked his suit's oxygen gauge for the 3rd time in 10 minutes, 47 minutes remaining. Around him, the twisted wreckage of what had once been the ship's main engineering section provided makeshift shelter from the vacuum of space. Sparks flew from damaged power conduits, casting strange shadows across the floating debris. Major, called Private Dahyun Kim from across the improvised shelter, I think I can get us communications if you give me 20 minutes and don't ask too many questions about my methods. Park smiled despite their desperate situation. Kim was floating upside down relative to his position, working on what appeared to be a coffee maker that had somehow survived the ship's destruction. Beside her, pieces of the navigation computer's quantum processor sparkled in the emergency lighting. "Do what you need to do, Private," Park replied, then turned to address the other survivors floating nearby. "Listen up, people. We're not dead yet, which means we're still in this fight." The alien observation pod maintained a safe distance from the wreckage field, its crew watching through high-powered sensors. Observation Officer Thylix of the Harmony Collective adjusted his visual receptors, trying to make sense of what the humans were doing. "Commander Exton," Thylix reported, his voice filled with confusion. "The human survivors are not attempting to signal for rescue. They appear to be building something?" Through the pod's sensors, they watched as a dozen humans worked with tools salvaged from the wreckage. Corporal Wonho Shin had somehow gotten 3 of the ship's maintenance robots operational, and they were helping to move larger pieces of debris into defensive positions. The humans worked in the vacuum of space with practiced efficiency, their movements coordinated, despite the impossible circumstances. "What are they constructing?" asked Tactical Analyst Morpheus, her crystalline form pulsing with curious colors. The answer became clear as the hours passed. The humans were building a fortress. They used sections of the ship's hull as walls, mounted broken weapon systems from the ship's destroyed armory, and somehow managed to create a defensive position that could protect nearly 200 survivors who had been scattered throughout the wreckage. "Incoming transmission from the human position," reported Scanner Zilth, his tentacles twitching with nervousness. The communication crackled with static, but Private Kim's voice came through clearly. "Arcturus Station, this is Colony Ship Busan. Survivors, we are operational and holding position. Repeat, we are operational." "Operational?" Thylix whispered. "Their ship is destroyed. Half their people are dead. How can they be operational?" The answer came when a Zephyrian patrol squadron arrived to finish off any survivors. 6 sleek hunter-killers approached the wreckage field, expecting to find desperate humans begging for mercy. Instead, they found something that made their sensors scream warnings. The human fortress opened fire. The weapons shouldn't have worked. They were cobbled together from spare parts, powered by energy cells that had no business functioning in a vacuum, and operated by people who were running out of air. But somehow, impossibly, the humans had turned their destroyed colony ship into a weapon. "Direct hit on the lead Zephyrian vessel," reported Kim over the comm, her voice filled with excitement rather than fear. "Their shields are down to 60%. Through the observation pod's sensors, the aliens watched in growing horror as more humans emerged from hidden positions throughout the wreckage field. They moved from debris to debris, using improvised propulsion systems, attacking the Zephyrian ships from angles that should have been impossible. "Sir," Corporal Shin's voice joined the communication, "we've got civilian volunteers running ammunition between positions. Mrs. Youngji Choi from the hydroponics section is particularly good at this." The aliens watched as an elderly woman in a patched EVA suit maneuvered through the debris field, carrying makeshift ammunition. She moved with the confidence of someone who had been working in zero gravity her entire life, dodging Zephyrian energy blasts while delivering supplies to the human defenders. "They're treating this like a game," Extern observed, his voice thick with revulsion. "Listen to them. The human communications were filled with chatter that sounded more like a sports match than a life-or-death battle. Soldiers called out successful hits with genuine joy, shared jokes between attacks, and somehow managed to maintain morale despite their impossible situation. "Nice shot, Jim Young," called out Sergeant Tae-hyun Lee as his improvised railgun disabled a Zephyrian fighter's engines. "Your grandmother would be proud. She always said I was good with my hands," replied Specialist Jim Yong Song, laughing as she recalibrated her weapon for the next target. The Zephyrian squadron commander found himself facing something outside his experience. His ships were built for overwhelming smaller vessels, not for fighting ghosts who emerged from wreckage to strike at unexpected moments. Every time he targeted a human position, They simply melted back into the debris field, only to appear somewhere else moments later. "They're using our own tactics," he reported to his fleet command, confusion evident in his transmission. "Somehow they've turned their destroyed ship into a maze. We can't get clean shots without risking damage from debris." The battle reached its climax when Major Park's oxygen finally ran out. Instead of falling back, he switched to emergency reserves and continued fighting. Around him, other humans were doing the same thing, pushing their equipment beyond safe limits because the alternative was surrender. "Major," called Private Kim, "I've got an idea, but it's really stupid." "Those are my favorite kind," Park replied, reloading his improvised weapon with salvaged components. Kim had discovered that the colony ship's main reactor was still partially functional. If they could overload it in a controlled manner, the ECE energy discharge would disable the Zephyrian ship's sensors while creating an electromagnetic pulse that would cover their escape. "The problem is," Kim explained, "someone has to stay behind to trigger it manually. The remote systems are too damaged." Park didn't hesitate. "I'll do it." "No, sir," interrupted Corporal Shin. "This was my idea to use the reactor. I should be the one." "Actually," added Sergeant Lee, "I know the most about the reactor systems. It should be me." The alien observers watched in amazement as nearly a dozen humans volunteered for what was essentially a suicide mission. They argued over who had the right to sacrifice themselves, treating heroism like a privilege to be earned rather than a burden to be avoided. "We'll draw straws," Park decided. "Fair and square." They did, and Private Kim won, or lost depending on perspective. She accepted the assignment with the same cheerful determination she'd shown while jury-rigging communications equipment. "Tell my family I was having fun," she said, and somehow managed to make it sound like a joke rather than a farewell. The explosion, when it came, was visible from 3 star systems away. The colony ship's reactor created a brief artificial sun that disabled every electronic system within 1,000,000 kilometers. Under cover of the electromagnetic chaos, the surviving humans escaped in salvaged pods and maintenance shuttles. The Zephyrian squadron retreated in confusion, their senses blind and their confidence shattered. They had been defeated not by superior technology or overwhelming force, but by people who refused to accept that defeat was possible. "Commander," Scanner Zilth reported, his voice shaking, "I'm detecting human survivors heading for the inner system. They're singing." Through the static-filled communications, the aliens could hear human voices raised in harmony. Old songs from Earth, traditional melodies that spoke of home and hope and the refusal to give up even when everything seemed lost. "Send another report to the Council," X then ordered, his 6 eyes focusing on the retreating human pods. "Classification: Extreme threat. Recommend that all Zephyrian forces avoid human civilians. They are not non-combatants, they are delayed action weapons that activate when threatened." The report that reached the Galactic Council that day contained a conclusion that would haunt alien military theorists for generations. Humanity had not just survived an impossible situation, they had transformed it into victory through methods that defied every known law of warfare, physics, and common sense. The bridge of the UES Soul hummed with quiet efficiency as Admiral Suyung Bai watched the final Zephyrian battle group disappear into hyperspace. The massive view screen showed empty space where moments before 30 enemy warships had been preparing for one last desperate assault. Now only debris and the distant glow of liberated worlds remained. "Admiral," reported Communications Officer Min-Soo Park, "we're receiving surrender broadcasts from the remaining Zephyrian outposts throughout the sector. They're abandoning their positions and requesting safe passage to neutral space." Bay nodded, her weathered face showing no triumph, only quiet satisfaction. Around her, the bridge crew worked with the same calm professionalism they'd displayed throughout the campaign. No wild celebrations, no cheering, just people doing their jobs well, as if winning an impossible war was simply another day at the office. "Signal all fleet commanders," Bay ordered. "Begin rescue and recovery operations. Priority goes to liberated civilians, then prisoner processing. I want medical ships dispatched to every former slave world within the hour." Lieutenant Commander Hyunjin Choi looked up from his tactical display, where friendly green icons now filled spaces that had been blood red just days earlier. Ma'am, the Kepler colonies are reporting massive civilian evacuations in progress. The Zephyrians abandoned their processing facilities so quickly they left the containment fields running. How many? Bay asked. 17 billion sentient beings, Choi replied, his voice filled with quiet awe. All free. The number hung in the air like a prayer answered. 17 billion lives that would wake up tomorrow in freedom instead of chains. The crew absorbed this information with the same calm they'd shown throughout the war, but something deeper passed between them. A shared understanding that they'd been part of something larger than themselves. Across the galaxy, in the crystalline chambers of the Galactic Council, the alien observers were struggling to make sense of what they'd witnessed. Commander Exthen of the Void Touched floated before a massive display showing the final battle statistics. The numbers should have told a story of impossible odds overcome through superior tactics, but that wasn't what the data revealed. The humans lost more ships than they should have, reported tactical analyst Morpheus, her crystalline form pulsing with confused colors. Their casualty rates were higher than necessary. By every mathematical model, they could have achieved victory with half the losses. Then why didn't they? Asked Observation Officer Thylix, his compound eyes reflecting the data streams. Because they chose to save people instead, Exthen replied, his voice filled with something that might have been wonder. Every time they had to choose between tactical advantage and rescuing civilians, they chose the civilians. Every single time. The recordings played on the chamber's screens, human ships diving into impossible situations to evacuate slave colonies. Soldiers staying behind to hold positions while transport ships escaped with refugees. Entire battle. Groups sacrificing themselves to buy time for civilian evacuations. We watched them face impossible odds, Exthen continued, addressing the assembled council members, and they turned it into something we don't have words for. Art, maybe. Terrible. Beautiful poetry written in starfire and sacrifice. The council chamber fell silent as the final recordings played. The last battle above the Zephyrian capital world, where Admiral Bay's fleet had fought not to destroy the enemy homeworld, but to capture it intact. The humans could have simply bombarded the planet from orbit, ending the war in hours. Instead, they'd fought a costly ship-to-ship engagement to preserve civilian lives on both sides. Ambassador Jinwoo Kim stepped forward to address the council one final time. His simple black suit looked even more primitive, surrounded by the flowing energy fields and bioluminescent robes of the alien delegates. But somehow he commanded the chamber's attention effortlessly. "Honorable council members," Kim began, "you called us barbaric for choosing war, but we didn't choose it. We simply refused to let evil prosper, while civilized beings debated the proper procedures for stopping it." Elder Quicks of the Harmony Worlds extended a tentacle in what his species considered a gesture of confusion. But surely violence cannot be the answer to violence. Our philosophers have proven that war only breeds more war. Kim's expression didn't change, but something in his posture reminded the aliens why they'd been so afraid of humanity in the first place. The Zephyrians enslaved 3 star systems. Children were bred for labor camps. Entire civilizations were processed like raw materials. Now those systems are free. You can call our methods barbaric, but our results speak for themselves. What? About the casualties, pressed Councillor Velthara of the Peaceful Collective, her serpentine form coiling with agitation. War always creates more suffering than it prevents. Does it? Kim asked quietly. Our military lost 43,000 personnel during this campaign. The Zephyrians killed 200 million civilians every year in their processing facilities. Do the math. The silence that followed was uncomfortable for the alien delegates. They had spent millennia perfecting diplomatic solutions, cultural exchanges, and economic pressures. The idea that sometimes violence was not only necessary but merciful challenged everything they believed about civilization. War isn't about hatred for us, Kim continued, his voice carrying to every corner of the vast chamber. It's about protecting what we love. Every human who died in this campaign died so that others could live free. That's not barbarism. That's the highest expression of civilization. The Council voted in emergency session that same day. The resolution passed unanimously, though not for the reasons humanity might have expected. Every member species would establish formal diplomatic relations with Earth, not out of respect or friendship, but out of a primal fear of what humans might do if they felt threatened again. As the human delegation prepared to leave the station, Councillor Velthara approached. Kim privately, her bioluminescent patterns flickered with colors that indicated deep emotional disturbance. "Your species terrifies us," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "We have weapons that can crack planets, technology that bends space and time, fleets that span star systems. But none of us fight the way you do. None of us turn death into art." Kim smiled, and for a moment the alien diplomat saw something in his expression that was both completely human and utterly alien to her. "Understanding? We prefer to call it hope." Hope. Velthara's patterns shifted to confusion. Every human who died in this war believed that their sacrifice would make the galaxy a better place, Kim explained. They fought not because they wanted to destroy, but because they wanted to build something worth preserving. That's what hope looks like when it has to fight for its life. The observation fleets returned to their home worlds, carrying data that would puzzle xenobiologists for centuries. Humanity had turned warfare into something that served life rather than destroyed it. They fought with a combination of practical efficiency and idealistic sacrifice that defied every known model of military behavior. The recordings would be studied in military academies across the galaxy, not as cautionary tales about the futility of violence, but as glimpses into the heart of something unprecedented, a species that had learned to make war itself an expression of love. On Earth, memorial services were held for the 43,000 who had given their lives to free 17 billion strangers. The ceremonies were quiet, dignified affairs, where families gathered to remember people who had chosen to die so that others could live. No parades, no martial music, just the simple acknowledgement that some things were worth fighting for. And in the liberated systems, children who had been born into slavery took their first breaths of free air. They would grow up in a galaxy where one species had proven that civilization wasn't about avoiding conflict, but about knowing what was worth fighting for. The alien observers had expected to document humanity's swift defeat. Instead, they had witnessed the birth of something new in the galaxy. A people who fought not because they loved war, but because they loved peace enough to die for it. That knowledge would change everything, though it would take the rest of the galaxy generations to understand what they had truly seen. The end.